Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. As you see, Dr. J. Bundy is not here. I don't know where he is, and I apologize for that. I sent him links and information yesterday, but I didn't hear anything from him. I saw that he was active on Facebook like 5 minutes ago, and I instant messaged him, but I didn't get a response. So I don't know if he's on his way. I don't know if he's having trouble communicating. I don't know if he's having problems with internet or what it is. But I sent him a message that I would start the show on time. And if he was able to get here, that just join when he was ready. And I see Pragmatic Crystal says, I will try to contact him. Thank you very much, Pragmatic Crystal. I appreciate that. And I see Mage say, give me a few minutes and I'll come in, and I appreciate that as well. I did pin a link in the comments that is a link to join the studio. Oh, I just got a message from Jay, and he says, I am here. Okay, I don't see him in the studio. All right, I don't see you in the studio. Are you there? I might have to restart my own computer. He might be there, and there might be something wrong from my end. Let's see what he says. I apologize for this. It says, I'm in StreamYard. It says a chat with AJ. Oh, okay. I gave him the wrong link. That is the problem. I gave him the wrong link. Okay, let's fix that. All right. My apologies. I gave you the wrong link. That was my fault. How on earth did that happen? Three RG 4N M62 3 G4N M62. They look like the same link, so why? Oh, there we go. Okay, we have J. Bundy. Thank you.
Yeah, hey.
My apology. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, no worries. I think it's just because we probably had a different room for the previously scheduled event. And so I had that link probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Yep. That makes sense. Okay.
Try to get on in frame here. It's always does weird stuff with my camera. All right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. I so much appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to actually get to talk a little bit more.
What does your shirt say? I think I know.
In Darwin we trust.
That's what I thought it said.
Yeah.
Is that merch that you sell, or did you
No, I think this is just something I got off Amazon.
Okay. That is cool. Well, let's start out with having you tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's always a weird topic. So I'm, I guess, Dr. J. Bundy. I'm an evolutionary biologist. Although I'm teaching anthropology and cultural anthropology and sociology this semester, so
That is
that's
cool.
interesting. Yeah. Um, I did my bachelor's and master's at Penn State. So I did my bachelor's in social dynamics, my master's in biological anthropology, and then dual PhD at Michigan State University in the Lenski lab. And yeah, I think that's most of it. I went to the University of Minnesota after that for a postdoc, and so yeah, now I'm teaching and honestly hoping to keep doing that for a while. Yeah, that's kind of the plan.
Can you say where you teach or not?
I don't. I'd rather not, but I teach.
Okay.
I teach at a community college.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
That's fine.
yeah,
Okay, one of the most fascinating things about you is that you were involved in the Lenski experiment.
yeah, definitely.
Can you tell us about your role and the whole meaning of that experiment?
Yeah. So for me, it was kind of interesting. Being in the lab, everybody sort of gets their own copy of the experiment, so to speak. So if you um, are doing experiments, they tend to like duplicate the lines for everyone. So you don't actually have to work with the main populations, like the lab manager usually. So usually the lab manager takes care of that, and then from day to day, and then a grad student does the transfers on the weekend. But I'm not like a microbiologist, so I didn't really have to do a lot of the transfers. I only did the transfer. I did transfer the long-term lines once, but
What are
that
transfers?
sorry, that's the like every day they have to the bacteria, they're in these flasks in an incubator, and
Mm-hmm.
it's being shaken. And then each day somebody has to come and take 1% of the population out and
Mm-hmm.
transfer it into a fresh flask with new media in it, new
Okay.
bacteria food. So yeah, they get transferred. That's sort of the main rhythm of the experiment, is that every day somebody has to come in and transfer these populations. So that's what's been going on for 35 years or whatever it is.
35 years?
I think since the or it's getting close. I think he started it in 88 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, it's
The year
getting up
in
there.
between my first and my second child.
Yeah, it's actually um well, it was weird. It moved for a little while to Texas because one of Lenski's other proteges is like took over the long-term lines,
Mm-hmm.
cuz Rich will retire sooner rather than later. I don't know. It's been Rich is going to retire soon for a while. So who knows? But they did sort of transfer the main work on the day to day of the lines to Jeff Barrick. But then Jeff Barrick just, I think, took a position at Michigan State. So it's staying where, so it's back home basically, which is that's sort of a fascinating story, because it was a big deal as far as who was going to be the new person. My work is primarily with digital organisms. I work with
Okay.
like artificial life, and
Oh,
so I did some educational type work with the long-term lines, where I was looking at like how they grow on sort of everyday sugars. The idea being that if you were going to do stuff in like a K through 12 classroom, um, that would be different things you'd had access to. Like you probably wouldn't be able to get lab grade like sucrose or whatever, but you could go to um, you could get Splenda or Sweet and Low, and they're bacteria, so they just want sugar. As long as there's sugar, they'll grow. And so that was sort of
okay. But Splenda and Sweeten though have no caloric content. Would they can still grow even with that?
Yeah, that's sort of what we were trying to determine was which ones they would grow on and, what sort of the variation would be. I don't remember the results of that because it was some time ago. But yeah, they did grow. I know some of the strains grew like only weakly on certain things or certain things struggled with certain sugars, but overall they were okay. Um, so yeah, so then most of my work is like with digital organisms, but it's like closely related. I use like a similar experimental design and ask similar questions. Sort of the idea being uh, they use E. coli because they're fast, right? They go through 6.5 generations a day. But for a lot of evolutionary questions, that's not fast enough because most grad students or researchers don't want to spend 30 years to get answers to questions. So computers are even faster. And so doing experimental evolution with digital organisms is way faster. Like I go through thousands of generations in hours as opposed to years. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah, so that's why so people don't realize this, but like so the lab is famous for the long-term lines. And like I said, I
Right.
when I transferred the long-term lines, it was really for like some anniversary or big thing we were doing for Rich, and we wanted everybody to have like transferred it and signed it or whatever. But the lab is actually an experimental evolution lab. So um, there are other experimental systems in the lab. So some people might do certain experiments with different type of bacterial strains. Sometimes people do stuff with like phage. Um, and other people like me do digital evolution experiments. So it's sort of as long as you're doing experimental evolution, that's sort of the lab. And so, yeah, it was sort of cool. So I'm on like one of the long-term lines papers that was like a big, team project that we all did. But most of my dissertation work focused on digital organisms, both experimentally and in terms of evolution education.
Okay, I want you to hold that thought, and we're
Sure.
gonna come back to that topic, but I've got a couple of things that I have starred that has come from the chat that we need to bring up. First of all, Sinister Porpoise gave me a $2 um, um,
Yeah,
super
hey,
chat. Thank
Porpoise.
you.
We were together in Kentucky and
Yeah.
we went to the Waffle House and
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
but none of the crazy things that are associated or happening at that time of day. But I enjoyed my food, so I'm kind of good to just go when I can just eat in peace, probably. Um, but I guess according to certain places, you got to get the full late night Waffle House experience.
Okay. And
Yeah.
from Pragmatic Crystal, August 2024, the LTEE populations passed 80,000 generations in the Barrack Lab.
Yeah, yeah. It just keeps going and going. The idea is to keep it going. Even Jeff Barrick, one of the because I asked Rich like how he went about choosing, who to pass the long-term lines to, because um there were so many choices. Um, and he said, a big part of it was he wanted it to be somebody who had other work and other systems in their lab that sort of they would be independently able to sustain the lab and the research, God forbid things change or don't work out. So that was sort of so yeah, it's the long term lines to be interesting. They're really everywhere in the sense that a lot of there's even like visual maps that they have of all the places that have copies of the long term lines because a lot of times people want to work on them and so you kind of
Oh,
just pack them up and ship them and so lots of labs get to do work on the long-term evolution experiment. And then it's been a big sort of framework for a lot of other evolution experiments, sort of the idea of starting with sort of some representative of a single time point, right? And then replicating it and, sort of getting to see evolution play out over, many instances of sort of from the same starting point in the same environment and seeing what happens. So that's become sort of a sort of a famous and well regarded methodology that a lot of labs in the field are using. And then overall, it's also pioneering because lots of labs try to do long-term evolution experiments. So there's sort of a growing appreciation for that. So it's got a big influence that's sort of a lot beyond the just those populations in that experiment itself.
Okay, this next comment I don't understand, so you're going to have to explain it to me. If you're thinking of creating right-handed amino acid-based life, don't.
No, I'm definitely not doing that. And I
Can you
don't.
explain what that means?
It's something about the way I think the protein folding happens when the configuration, but I don't work with actual biochemicals in my system.
Okay.
Yeah, I work with computational populations.
Okay. You are talking to someone who has very little education in biology. I became a Christian at 16. I was convinced at 17 that evolution was fake,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I took biology 101 in college with the understanding that evolution was fake
Wow.
and just you know, evolution was a very small part of the course. And of course, I gave the answers that the professor wanted to hear, never believing them myself. And so that is the limit of my biology
So
education.
that's pretty impressive, actually, I think,
Oh,
because
I'm very good at telling people what they want to
yeah,
hear.
well, also because I think for so many people with that background,
Mhm.
they're it may be hard to even get them into a biology classroom. So it's good that you did despite all that. Now, do you have like sort of a vivid memory of that as a conscious effort of like, I'm here, I'm taking this class, but I don't buy it, I'm just telling them what they want to
No, I
hear?
don't remember that at all. There's only 2 things I really remember from my biology class. One was that I got a D on a quiz. It's the lowest grade I ever got in college,
Wow.
and it was on the female reproductive system.
Wow.
I had
Wow.
I had the
Wow.
cycle
Wow.
backwards on
Wow.
which things did what. Um,
No,
and then
that's just sad, It's yeah.
well, I
Yeah.
ended up getting either an A or a B for the course.
Yeah, so that
I
was
just
just an
blew that one
aberration.
quiz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's you know, the things that sometimes happen to our students, when you sort of have those moments where you realize the disconnect between their background and what you're trying to teach them,
Mhm.
they're kind of really profound moments as an educator. They stick with you. Um, and I think that is actually one of the real pernicious aspects of religion is
Mhm.
the sort of built-in anti-education of the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because what happened to me after that was I ended up in a church that I went to because I believed that it was an intellectual church. There
Mm,
was a lot of pseudo-intellectualism there,
right.
but it was all focused on theology. And I bought into the idea that if someone was not starting from the standpoint that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, then they had no wisdom and there was nothing for me to learn from them. And so I only
Wow.
read and looked at material that started from that standpoint. Now, obviously, since I've become an atheist, I've been trying to fill in the gaps, and I've learned a great deal from Erica Gutsick-Gibbon, from John Perry. I've watched a number of things, but I also know that I still have some significant gaps because as you were speaking, I was coming in and out, not understanding some of what you had to say. I also listened to a lot of Dr. Dan on creation myths.
Yeah.
And I only understand about 2/3 of what he has to say. He completely loses me at points.
Yeah, sometimes I think that's on us as uh, you know, communicators to just communicate better. I'm always dealing with my own stuff, right? Sometimes when I'm talking and I'm not always thinking through what I say to make it as
Well,
clear as I should.
also, you're also here dealing with people that are on so many different levels because I can see that Logan Fisher works in a lab also, or has worked in a lab
Yeah,
also,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he knows exactly what you're talking.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm in a weird place too. I don't know as much as a lot of others do because of my background and the systems I work in. So I also didn't have a strong background in biology. I mean, I took a biology class in high school. I liked it. I didn't really take a lot of biology classes as an undergrad. I was
Mhm.
really into the social science. I was super into evolution,
Oh, really?
but yeah, but I kind of saw it as some of the sciencey stuff behind what because I at the time I wanted to be like a dating coach, and my plan was to go to law school.
Oh, now that's
And
where I went.
yeah, and so oh, you did go to law school?
Yeah, I have a law degree.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I still like kind of low key have like those like regrets of like maybe I didn't choose the
No, you
best
are
path for
exactly where
me.
you need to be. You need to be exactly where
I
you
I
are.
try to I try to convince myself of that, but I'm still really really interested in the law. So, and I'm always saying most academics think that we belong somewhere else.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, that was sort of my thing. And actually, one of my um advisors, I remember when he told me that because I had to take some time off from my time at Penn State because I'm bipolar. So when I first got diagnosed, I took some time off, and when I was getting ready to come back, he said, "You need to take a class in evolutionary biology." And I said, "Have I ever said the word biology to you?" Like I was actually offended. Um, so, but that's what happened was I took a class called Sex and Evolution, and then I was like,
Oh,
oh, this is where I
really?
should be. Yeah,
That is
yeah,
the one topic that still continues to
yeah.
trip me up.
And it was, but that was an anthropology class. So that's how and then I ended up in doing my master's thesis in biological anthropology. So that was sort of my thinking. So I was sort of into the social sciences with a biology spin. So like my mentor would say, he's like, I see us as evolutionary biologists. Like he didn't like the idea that because we were in anthropology, we were considered in the social sciences, right? Because, anthropology is in that sort of realm of sociology and psychology and that type of thing, where he saw us as we do experiments that are hypothesis driven, and we're testing evolutionary ideas. So he really saw us as evolutionary biologists um, who worked with humans. It just so happens that we work with human beings, and contemporary human beings are our test population. And so then when I met Rich Lenski, I was at a conference like presenting my master's work, and him and I just started talking about evolution. He goes, "It sounds like you want to get some more street cred as a biologist."
Ah,
And so
mhm.
when I started my PhD, I still thought I was going to get a PhD because at that point I had like fallen in love with doing research. And I just really liked it. And so I still was telling myself that all of this research stuff was just going to make me a better lawyer. And at the time, I was just enjoying the process of doing the work, so I was kind of fine with it. And then over time, I kind of shifted towards focusing on an academic career. So still, even now, you know, a lot of my colleagues, like, you know, they're super hardcore biology nerds and they get going about stuff, and I'm like, yeah, like I'm not interested. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, but you know, because even then, like my stuff is a lot about the history of science, the philosophy of science, and then also like the intersection of what we do in education and social issues. So things like creationism and acceptance of evolution, and you know how that relates to somebody's background, you know, like that, those type of things are still really interesting to me. And then using digital organisms allows me to test questions that are related. So for instance, a lot of my personal research is about like mating systems, right? And it's a lot easier to like evolve reproductive systems using these digital organisms where we can sort of like play with them, you know, and
And
whereas
see
working with real organisms, it's
how
hard.
sexual reproduction would have evolved?
Yeah, like we see basically like you know, how they evolve to solve certain challenges. So for instance, and like one of my systems called we call it the mating game. Basically, they have to um they're just dropped into like a grid. You could think of it as like a grid where every square has either a red or a blue berry on it. And they're, you know, they're trying to harvest and eat as many berries as possible because they get a point for every berry they eat. But in a lot of cases, we make their like we give them a penalty if they switch berries. So if you eating red berries, you get a point, but if you switch to blueberry, you lose a point and a half.
Okay, let me back you up for a minute,
Sure.
because you're talking about something I have absolutely no concept of.
So just think about Pac-Man,
Mhm.
right? So
Well,
Pac
okay, what I was about to ask you is your entire experiment is all on a computer simulation? None of that is in a real
Yeah,
organism?
they're just programs. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
they're computer programs that they have a genome, and their genome basically allows them to um,
Mate,
reproduce.
reproduce, okay.
It allows them to clone themselves.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it also encodes, in this case, like a brain and like sensors, so they can like sense the world that they're in now. We don't give them anything. We don't give them anything other than like the basic architecture of their brain and their genome. And when we first like drop them into this world, they can't do anything other than reproduce. Like the earliest organisms like just move. Maybe they get dropped in, maybe they like move once, reproduce and die or something, because they
Okay.
haven't learned anything, right? So they're
Do they
always starting from
sometimes
nothing.
do they sometimes reproduce, organisms that are not viable?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. All because when they do this, especially in the sexual system, you know, they have to mate with another organism, and so then their genomes get mixed together, and so sometimes, and then we also apply mutations, and so yeah, a lot of times they can just sort of have a lethal genome that's not viable. Yeah.
Okay, Sinister Porpoise is, just got a
Is it written in Python? No, it's written in C++. It's called MABE, Modular Agent Based Evolver. It's written in C++, but we use Python for a lot of the experimental control or the visualizations, or uh, a lot of the tools that we have for it.
okay. And Sinister asks, "Is the source code available?"
Yeah, yeah, everything is open source. It's free.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. And then
So, can You
Can I
use the
use
code to
code to
make
make
like an
him
idiot.
look like an idiot?
Yeah, but the problem is he's so dense and he wouldn't even realize that well, it wouldn't, it just doesn't, it's like it's kind of like a brick wall response from that man. But yeah, you could. And maybe some people have.
So
uh,
now the organisms that you've created, you said originally all they could do was reproduce. Obviously,
yeah,
they have
yeah.
to be
So
able to eat as
they
well.
sort of, yeah, normally they have like their genomes are usually empty, but they have some sort of mechanism of copying themselves. Uh,
Have they evolved something to give them locomotion?
these do, the
Okay.
ones that I'm talking about, and that just depends on how they're programmed. So like a lot. So for instance, the organisms that I used for my dissertation research, they didn't move. But these organisms do because they have this harvesting task, right? Because that's their challenge. They're programmed with brains that basically also include a sensor, and some of their genomic encoding is used to give them the ability to move. But we don't hard code that into them. So basically, it's something they can evolve. It's like,
Mhm.
but when they start, they don't have. When they start, they're just what we call a base replicator. They basically can copy themselves, but the rest of their genome is typically just blank instructions. And so then they have to evolve the ability to sense and move, and however they go about solving it. So that's why it's fun for us, because it's fun to see that they actually do it.
Do you manipulate the environment?
Yes, that's what we do. Is we
Okay.
manipulate the environment and see how they respond to the manipulation. So for instance, if in the environment there's no switch cost, they will just eat everything, because typically how they reproduce is through what's called a tournament. We just take two random organisms and we keep the one with the highest score. Then we pick another organism, keep the one with the highest score, pick another one, keep the one with the highest score, and then whoever is left at the end of however big the tournament is, say it's like 5, then that's the one that would get to reproduce, or in this case that's the one that would get to choose a mate. Um, so they're literally just dropped in, and they're trying to eat as many berries as possible, so that they have a high score, so that they have the highest probability of reproducing and going on to the next generation. Um, and so what happens is, if we um, they have some pressure to keep the berries balanced, right? Because if they eat a lot of red ones, there'll be mostly blue ones. If they eat all the blue ones, there'll be mostly red ones. And so if we introduce this switch cost, they have to figure that out. Um,
Oh, okay.
and and so the other thing that they have to do is, like I said, they have to pick a mate. So if they win a tournament, then they have a preference. Like, one of their genes is just a site that we read, and it determines like what their mating preference is. If it's a 0, um, it's they mate randomly. And then if it's whatever number it is, because it's just, we have discrete numbers, like if it's a 1 or a 2, that just tells us which berry they prefer. So they either
Okay.
prefer like red or blue berries.
So some organisms like one and some organisms like the other better.
Yeah, yeah. And if you
Interesting.
win, and if you have the highest score in the tournament, then you get to choose a mate. And to do that, you're going to have another tournament, except you're going to pick the organism with the highest score for the berry you prefer. So if you prefer red, you're going to pick the organism that's the reddest. If you prefer blue, you're going to pick the organism that's the bluest. So they have to now balance the what we call the natural selection pressure, like thinking about, they have to survive and thrive well enough in the environment to get to reproduce, right? And that's what the score is. Can you harvest well enough to, you know, earn a mating opportunity, basically? And then you have to balance that against being attractive to whatever organism is doing the selecting. So it's a balance between natural selection and sexual selection. Um,
Okay. So
yeah.
have they evolved sexes?
So they don't really evolve. Yeah, we call them mating types,
Okay.
because they're sort of, they're not hard coded into like roles or anything. So for instance, you could be, we call sometimes for shorthands, we call the first parent the mom, but really we call it parent one, but sometimes we say mom. But you can be the mom one round and the dad the next or whatever. So that's so they're really, it's really more about the traits that they evolve to solve this. So for
Mm-hmm.
instance, there's a wrinkle, and the wrinkle is so the first organism to win a tournament based on its highest score becomes parent one. There's then another tournament where to get to be into, all right, so there's these things in nature, they're called leks, and a lek is basically like a mating arena. And like, say for like birds, maybe the females go to this lekking area, and the males are like staking out little territories, and they're competing with each other. And so it's a space where the female will get to evaluate sort of a lot of different males quickly, and choose whichever one they prefer. And so we create like a lek for these digital organisms, and the way we do that is we create the second tournament, but you have to win one of the first foraging tournaments to get into this tournament. So it's like a winners only tournament.
Okay.
So that way you have to be a good forager to like earn your way into the lek. And so then in this winners only tournament, you pick the one that has the highest score for the berry you prefer. And then we have parent one, and now we have parent two. And then they go into the mating chamber to make a baby, but their fecundity, in other words, how likely their mating is to result in an actual offspring,
Mm-hmm.
is determined by what we call their shape. And
Mm-hmm.
their shape is just basically a number between -1 and +1. And the idea is that it represents like perfectly convex and perfectly concave. And the idea is that if they're both like -1, they're the same shape and they won't have any contact with each other. If
Mm-hmm.
they're both +1, they'll be like this and they'll slide past each other. And so in those cases, they have like zero mating success. But if one is -1 and one is +1, then they always have like 100% chance of reproducing because they have
Are any
perfectly
zeros?
complementary shapes. Um,
Are any of them zeros, or are they all
Yeah,
one?
yeah, they can be a zero. If they're zero, they're flat, and they typically have like an intermediate level of reproduction, so maybe like a 50% chance.
Would that
Um,
be kind of like a third sex?
it's we don't actually see it typically. When do we see? Sometime they don't do. What do I have to do to make them not do the shape? Really, it doesn't, because when they do that, they're all the same thing.
Okay.
So it's it's sort of like they're the
Kind of like
same shape. So they're
asexual?
yeah, it's yeah, it gets a little weird, but that doesn't happen because typically um oh, it happens if we reduce the shape mating function. If we make the shape
Oh, okay.
mating function like
Okay.
not that severe, then
Mhm.
they just become the same shape and they accept the intermediate level of 50. They're like, it'll work sometimes, it won't work other times, but it's okay. Typically, though, we just don't run those conditions a lot, because we're more interested in what happens when there's pressure on them to be different shapes.
Okay.
Um, and so what ends up happening sometimes, and what we're looking for is it's called cross signaling. So basically, red eaters become one shape, blue eaters become the other shape. They only eat one color, and then they use their preference for the other color as a cue to make sure that they get the right shape. That is like a really cool thing that evolves, and it just evolves like de novo. Like all we did was like set up the world with the red and blue berries and the switch cost, and we sort of see them do this thing, and then I evolved them to do all sorts of other crazy stuff. Like we can make the system coercive, and they can like force themselves on each other or like resist that. Or yeah, I actually got into coercion. Is actually a really interesting topic in sexual in the world in sex. I guess it would be the right way to say it. Like sex, people who are interested in like sex research, whether that's like sort of more on the social sciencey end, where you're interested in it as like a social problem, or sort of more like an evolutionary perspective, and like how does this behavior evolve or become adaptive. And so what happened was, I have a colleague who actually designed the system, who he has like really interesting theories about reproductive conflict. And so he for a while was like really convinced that a lot of what we see as sexual conflict is not actually conflict. It's really what we might call like assortative mating. It's really like a way for people to get like the most fit and adaptive partners. It just seems like it's conflict. And so we went to this seminar, and this woman was talking about sexual conflict in like ducks and dolphins and all these various organisms. And it was very vivid. It was like very graphic, but it was like very fascinating. Everybody's like really fascinated, because there's really like a lot of coevolution that happens, for instance. So for instance, in like birds and these ducks and stuff, there's like, the males are evolving adaptations to be able to more successfully force copulations, and then the females are evolving counter adaptations to maintain their choice. And so it almost becomes like this runaway, like lock and key type of situation, but then they have to have different adaptations for the mates that they actually want. So then there's like a different selective pressure to be good at coercion versus good at being selected. Sorry, you were saying something. Go ahead.
I was saying, I was told, and I'm sure there's some people in my audience that won't know this, that because of coercion in sex with ducks, that female ducks have evolved a maze-shaped vagina. And to counteract that, males have developed a corkscrew-shaped penis.
Yeah. That's the type of stuff she was like getting into. And so it was just really kind of fun, because he was like, I get it. No, there's conflict. No, I stand corrected. It was like one of those like really cool academic moments where like somebody, somebody's seen evidence of something now, right? And they have this like watershed moment of like, I was wrong. That's definitely a real thing that's happening. And so I was just playing around with our system one day, and I was like, I think it'd be really interesting if I could think about coercion algorithmically, because then we could study it the way we want to as scientists, which is abstractly sort of divorced from how it plays out in the real world, which is often violent and right. Because this research that she did was very like, people were super into it, but it's very graphic, right? And it's and there's animals and there's real harm being done to them and things like that. Whereas like with my digital organisms, there's always joke there no ducks were harmed in this process, right? And so I was able to like abstract it out into a concept. So for instance, in our system, there's basically an evaluation loop. So let's say you win the tournament and you become parent one, and now you get to exercise some mate choice, right? I build this lek for you, and you're going to get to evaluate these mates, and you're going to get to pick the one that you like the most, right? And so we do that with a loop, right? We just like we just gather the numbers of the organisms we want you to evaluate, and you literally loop through them and pick the one that has the highest score for the bear you prefer, right? So then coercion is really just breaking that loop.
Mm. Okay.
So instead of giving you a chance to evaluate me and see what my score is for the berry you like, I just say, skip all that. I'm now parent 2. So maybe I'm like the third guy that would be in this lek. You get to evaluate the first one. You decide if you like the first or second one more. Okay. You say you pick the second one. Now I'm the third guy, and I say, nope, I'm not even going to let you evaluate me. I just became parent 2, and now we go into the mating chamber. Right.
Okay. All right.
That is meaningfully coercion because I've taken away your choice. I've taken away your ability to continue to evaluate the rest of the competitors. And from the perspective of the competitors, I've undermined the competition, right? They were evolving to be the brightest or the flashiest so that they could win you over with their preference. And I've short-circuited that competition by just making myself parent 2. So even though it's literally just a few lines of code and it changes these things these programs do, and there's no real like animals or anything involved, it is actually coercive mating. It does exactly what this phenomenon is to us as biologists, just instantiated in a computer where it's safe and very, very fast.
Okay. I have 2 big questions. One is
Sure.
the simulation that you have. How many generations of whatever you call these organisms have gone through?
It just depends. That's literally just like a number in a settings file, and we tell it, how long we want it to go for. I typically run most of my experiments for at least like 10,000 or 20,000 generations typically. That's like my most common thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I want to have like a big sexy number. Now, if I do, because, so the long-term lines, right, is like 80,000 or whatever. And that kind of sets like the max. Like nobody really expects to outdo that LTE because it's been going on for so long. And, it's hard to find an experimental system that's faster than bacteria. So, something like 100,000 generations is like mind blowing to most people. Now, if you really think about evolution, 100,000 generations is nothing. It's really like the blink of an eye.
Right. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was thinking of, is if you were trying to simulate evolution from the beginning of life to today, I have the vaguest idea of how many generations you would need.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it's like 10 times, 10 to the some ungodly exponent, right? That like none of us would even know how to pronounce the English name of it. But what I'll say is this: because of those limitations, in practicality, what we now call a long-term evolution experiment is relatively short, as I like to say. In other words,
Okay.
if you're working with, even like microbes or yeast or something, like something in that microbial range, it's even something like 1,000 generations
Mhm.
would take a long time, right? You think
Mhm.
like 6 generations a day, that's however many a month. It's probably, I think, a couple. I've done the math. It's probably a couple years or something like that, right? So that's a lot, right? If you're a grad student, especially because a lot of times you're not sure what the result's going to be, right? So it's just a lot of time to spend on a project, especially if it might not work out. And if you're working with something like plants, maybe you know it's going to be dozens of generations is considered a long time. So that's sort of the interest there. So what I was getting at is, for us, it's like I do some work that's about history, where the point is to just evolve things for like a super long period of time to ask historical questions. So in that case, I would probably go crazy, right? I could do 100,000 generations or 500,000 generations or something. But that's only because I'm asking a question that's uniquely suited to having some crazy number. But for the most part, even 10,000 generations is far beyond what any other researcher can do in any other system. And for the most part, most of my colleagues can't even wrap their heads around what it would be like to do 10,000 generations with their system.
Okay, now this may be an ignorant question.
No such thing, not from you at least.
The creationist complaint about the Lenski experiment is that, okay, but you still just have bacteria.
Sure.
Could you at some point see it evolving into something beyond a bacteria?
Yeah, so arguably that's already happened,
Okay.
and they just moved the goalpost because there's the one population that evolved the citrate that it could basically metabolize the citrate that was just sort of a added ingredient in the media, not really a food source, more like a stabilizing agent. But it can now metabolize it. And so that was something that by definition E. coli, at least in that type of environment where the type of aerobic environment, could not do. And so there's always been a debate around the extent to which that counts as like a new species or something, right? I think,
well, they don't want a new species. To them, speciation is acceptable. You have to go. The problem is that you have to go beyond their kind, and they have no definition of what a kind is.
Right. And then also for us, we understand that those type of definitions and distinctions are inherently arbitrary.
Right.
So for us, it's more interesting to talk about, oh, this is new variation, this is a new trait, this is a new behavior. What are the consequences of that?
Information.
Right. Whether you call that just another a weird line or a new variant or a new ecotype, like, for us, that's always going to be arbitrary. And to be honest with you, I think, and this is part of the complexities that they don't want to represent accurately, is, to be honest, these are to some extent questions for different researchers, right? The people who are doing this work of evolving these different strains, and they're asking evolutionary questions and observing these cool outcomes, their job for the most part, not say that's not something they're interested in or have great takes on, but their job for the most part is not the phylogenetic analysis of what counts as a new species. To some extent, there's other people who that's more cladistics and the finer points, that's more their specialty. Or the people who it's almost a philosophy of science question as far as what is a species and what is the importance of the species concept or defining the boundaries of the species concept. For most evolutionary biologists, that's just like not part of their job description or something they're even that interested in. It just happens to be that in this case, there's this like glaring thing that the creationists are always saying, but it's still an E. coli, but it's still an E. coli, but it's still an E. coli. And I go, oh, actually, we just did this thing that technically E. coli don't do. And they're like, oh, well, now it doesn't count and all this other stuff. And for the most part, people are just, I'm not interested in that noise, and they move on. Yeah.
Okay.
But there was a huge back and forth about it that people can read. And again, I would say it played a role in the sense of it led to some further experimentation and collecting of data points just to sort of really iron out some of those arguments. So it's not all bad with the creationist.
Mhm,
There's
mhm.
a silver lining for anybody looking for one.
Okay. I have some comments that I've been holding, but we're
Sure,
only 5
sure.
minutes to the end of the show. Can you stay long enough?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Let's see. The first one said, "Ask Jay about Behe."
Oh,
And there's another one along the same lines. Well, no, I guess I don't have that one. Okay.
so I had a debate with Michael Behe
Oh, you
on
did?
yeah, that was on Michael Beverly's channel. I hope it's still up there because I know Michael's taken a hiatus from YouTube. Yeah, very, very akin to sort of my speech at the Creation Museum. I actually think, sorry, at the Ark Encounter. I think my speech at the Ark Encounter was even probably more on the nose. I really just tried to draw for people the connection that really this creationist movement plays. I think one of the mistakes we've made is to not recognize that these are the bad guys. They're not just the silly guys. That when we look at what's going on in our country right now, for instance, with this sort of, you know, Christian nationalist sort of theocratic movement that we see, um, creationism is very important to that thing because it derives its political capital from religious cover, right? It can't move the way it moves without people believing that this is a Christian movement, right? And so these apologists, particularly the intelligent design creationist type guys, they are the ones who are providing the intellectual, pseudo intellectual cover for a lot of this.
Mhm,
And it's sometimes hard to connect those two things because when you see AIG just doing some dumb thing about fossils, or you see Cliff Connectley, harassing some college students. It can sometimes be hard to see the connection, but it's very important because to me, they're the foundation. They're the people that again are making it seem like uh, these ideas have an acceptable place in our discord,
mhm,
and I think that that's incredibly dangerous.
mhm.
So, I tried to bring that out in my conversation with Michael Behe because I think so often it gets lost in the sauce.
Okay. And then the next one I had was, do you work entirely with artificial genomes or something like the fruit fly genomes or segments thereof?
So I work entirely with artificial organisms. I don't normally. I hesitate to call them a simulation because in our line of work, it's sort of a dirty word. There are aspects that are simulated, but you have to remember evolution is substrate neutral. What I mean by that is evolution requires variation between organisms in a population. It requires inheritance. In other words, organisms have to sort of be more like their parents than random. And it requires selection. In other words, some organisms do better at reproducing than others. So our systems have all that. So they are actually evolving populations. It's just that they exist in a computer. Um, but there are people who have sort of a similar skill set who are doing things like computationally engineering actual genomes. And so I don't want to poo-poo that. I just don't do that, but there are people who do that, and we're sort of getting to that point where the interface between genomic engineering and programming and sort of programmable cells is like really getting there. It's getting towards like the sort of science fiction space. But I stick to stuff that's exclusively computational, but it is very exciting and cool.
Okay, and Tsunami says, I'm going to need you to help me make clones of myself.
I think that is something that will get me thrown in the gulag. I don't know. I don't know if I love me some Tsunami, but I don't know if the world can handle multiples.
Okay.
Although we could start the revolution for sure. That would be that's the upside.
Okay. I want to close out by asking you about Stand Up for Science. Are you involved in Stand Up for
No,
Science?
what is that?
Oh, okay. Erica Gutzik-Gibbon is the one that introduced me to the idea, and there's organizations around the country that are doing Stand Up for Science events, and they are fighting back against the Christian nationalists, against RFK Jr., against anyone who is in the current administration that is trying to stamp out science. One of their major goals is to stop the defunding of scientific research.
So yeah, I'd like to get involved. That sounds like something I'd be really passionate about, and I definitely think it's important. I mean, I think even in some of the recent this proposed bill about transgender ideology, as soon as it gets into what is transgender ideology, it says that it's anything going against the biologically determined reality of two genders and two sexes and all of this stuff. That sex is determined at birth and binary and all of this stuff. And it's right in there that this is about biology, that this is about science, and of course they're lying and they're wrong. And I wish they would just tell us the truth, which is that it's their theologically determined concept of sex and gender. But you can see where it is the science that is going to be misrepresented and then weaponized to harm marginalized people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. Pragmatic Crystal has given
There's a
us
link.
a
Oh, that's
link
awesome. Yeah,
for
yeah.
Stand Up for Science. It's just www.standupforscience.net. So it's very simple. Thank you so much, Pragmatic Crystal, for giving us that.
She's the best.
I don't know if you saw it, but I released a video yesterday regarding an amendment. Well, actually, it's 5 amendments to the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act. Nancy Mace, representative from South Carolina and candidate for governor of South Carolina, introduced these amendments, and they passed. One of which will deny gender-affirming care to anyone who is covered by TRICARE, which is the military. And the way she introduced the bill is we need to stop castrating children. But something that was missed not only by Nancy Mace, but by everyone who even spoke out against the bill, was that this affects military spouses too. I get my health insurance from TRICARE because my husband was career military. He was career Army. And so now gender affirming care will no longer be covered by TRICARE. And I mentioned this on Purple's show, and Purple brought up something that I hadn't even thought of, which is that HRT, hormone replacement therapy for postmenopausal women, explaining that for the audience, not for you, Jay, you obviously understand that, is a form of gender affirming care. As soon as this bill passes, which it will in January, because they have to, otherwise there will be no budget for the military. Once this passes and is signed into law, will military spouses be banned from receiving HRT?
My suspicion, and I hate to say that, well, but I just think it's true. I think this is going to be a situation of open discrimination.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think this is going to be a situation because most forms of gender affirming care are things that are way more commonly used with cis people. And,
Oh,
it's the
really?
same thing. Yeah, because, to be honest, I think there's probably a good chance that RFK himself, I think he's on testosterone replacement. I think a lot of those right-wing MAGA guys are.
I didn't know there was testosterone replacement for males. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah, and Joe Rogan's on it. A lot of those right wingers are on it because they're all into being the MMA alpha Chad males, and and so a lot of them, to their credit, they have they're maintaining a very high level of muscularity, well into their 50s and beyond. And yeah, most of us think that for what a lot of them do is they're going to their doctors and just saying, "Hey doc, getting a little older, but I'm really into sort of, health and fitness. I like to work out a lot, and I'm just not feeling the same pep in my step." And that doctor's going, "Yeah, as you get older, your testosterone levels are declining. I can give you a pretty safe level that's not going to have any major health consequences." And so yeah, they get on hormone replacement therapy. So yeah, that's going to be the case with so many things. I mean, even something like genital surgery, that's going to be a lot of times just a medical need, or sometimes a result of however somebody's genitalia, maybe that they're born with, just something that they decide needs to be done. Sometimes it's trauma, like a car accident or a sports injury or something like that. And so I have a hard time believing that we're just going to stop doing all those things. What I really think is it's always going to be context dependent, and it's going to be one of the things that seems to just only come up when it's trans people involved.
I wanted to respond to Dr. Osiris's comment about gynecomastia, because if you watch my video to the very end, you can see the outtakes of where I am trying to learn how to pronounce gynecomastia.
Yeah, matter of fact, I think somebody has said that. I think Frank Turek himself
He did.
has. Yeah,
I included that
yeah,
saying that in the video.
yeah. So it's just it's just such a weird place that we're at with all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we gotta get together and talk about these
Well,
people.
the other thing I was worried about is, like, if a woman has breast cancer and she has to have her breasts removed, and then she wants counseling to help her deal with how she feels in her gender without breasts, that's going to be forbidden because that's gender affirming care.
That's the thing. I actually dated somebody who had a prosthetic boob. Just as again, just they were born with an asymmetry, and that was the solution that came to a long time ago. I hate this. It almost feels like a lot of this immigration stuff, where the cycle was people got smart. The first time people voted for Trump, he was going to shake up the system. They wanted something different. People were just sort of throwing caution to the wind. The second time, you had to really be on this crazy trip because we were in the middle of the pandemic. So you had to be sort of full blown, anti-Fauci and the Fauci ouchie. You had to be on that tip. I think in 24, people got wise, and all of a sudden they were saying they were voting for Trump for his policies. And we would ask them, which policies? And the two things they would always say were the economy and immigration. And all Trump had ever told us about the economy and immigration for this new term was tariffs and mass deportation. But then when we got tariffs and mass deportation, all of a sudden they were coming back with I didn't vote for this. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure when I talked to you in October, this is exactly what you were voting for.
Right.
And I think a similar thing may happen if we don't just do open discrimination where, cis people get everything they want, and then trans people have to fill out this extra form and then they don't get it. What's going to happen is all of these things are not going to be available to cis people. They're going to lose their minds. And then we're going to get a very similar, I didn't vote for this. I did, this is not what I asked for. And then we're going to have to remind them of what the real results of their bigotry were, because again, this is exactly what they're voting for.
Well, we are out of time, but I really appreciate you coming here and talking. I have learned a great deal from this conversation.
Yeah. This was super fun, and I'd love to come back. There's so many things I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about, the Ark protest, and also, your history with that, and then also like, the value you see in like us getting together in person, in physically. Yeah. So we got to do this again.
Okay, definitely. As soon as the show is over, we can talk about setting
Yeah, I'll
a date.
hang back a minute. Yeah.
Okay. And next week there will be no show. I'm going to be in Virginia visiting my grandchildren.
Oh,
And then
awesome.
the following week, it is going to be Sinister Porpoise, and she is going to come and talk about being a former Mormon.
That's going to be awesome. That's going to be a great show.
It's
going to be great.
I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking at Sinister's awesome. One of my favorite people.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. Thank you in the chat for your comments and questions. They have been very helpful. Jay, I just want to say, keep up the good work.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Live your life.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.